Am I controlling the slide? Okay, so let's just go ahead, right?
Good evening, welcome. This is the brown bags, I'm having a trouble starting my intros today. This is the professional VMware brown bag. It is the 1st of March here in the APAC region, and we're heading into our 5th session of the VCAP DCD brown bags. I'm Alistair Cook, and you can find me, hopefully shortly you'll be able to find me through the professional VMware site and on back to my Demitas site. And I'm very pleased today to be putting in the hot seat my friend from Singapore, Iwan. Iwan was a student on a course a couple of years ago, and we worked out that he'd actually produced some of the material that was presented in the course. And it's entirely his fault that we have this brown bag running in the region, or at least thanks to him. So I'll hand over to Iwan.
Thank you. Okay, so like Alistair said, and then just turn off his phone. Somebody just called me apparently.
Such is the life of a systems engineer.
So I'm a pre-sales in Singapore. I've been with VMware for about 4 years, and been in the industry for almost 18 years, and apparently unable to retire anytime soon because of 2 young girls. Happy doing what I do. I serve what we call the strategic accounts in this part of the world, right? And what I believe is we learn together, right? And a lot of these things are new, you know, so we learn things together. So this is not meant to be a one-way, me sharing with you. And so today, I just want to share 2 things. Alistair, since I have taken the test, right, the beta, and I just want to say a couple of things. Alistair, if I say something, since you are a trainer, that you don't think it's appropriate, just do a beep, you know, no, just interrupt me, right? Right?
No problem.
Basically, I just want to give some sort of encouragement to everybody, right? And I was quite scared initially about the test, right? I took the DCD4, the beta, and so the DCD4 has been battle tested. You know, the test has been, I would say, many people have taken it, right? And so I thought that the beta for DCD5 will be just a subset, just focus on the version 5 Delta only, so going really, really deep into it, right? So, I mean, they will not be asking any more on DCD4 because it was all battle tested. So I was quite afraid that I'm going to fail, right? But apparently the team has been pretty fair, so they know that I think on a day-to-day life, right? If you've been doing design as a consultant, right? You should find it pretty much at home. Now, it's not an easy test. That's for sure. What we do is not simple, right? But you don't find weird cases where you think, hey, that is hitting under the belt, right? And so that is the good news. Now, having said that, right, the beta and the actual, and I don't want to give the impression that the actual is going to be the same, because you know, some of us have given feedback to the team. Like, for example, I gave a feedback that personally I would like to see, instead of 131 questions, right? I just want to see 5 questions actually for the first 2 hours, and that's an open book, and then we're given a 15-minute break, and then the next 2 hours is a closed it's a closed book. Of course, the open book is hands-on, right? Lab. That is my preference, instead of being bombarded with questions. Now, the test itself, they're pretty fair. If you look at the blueprint, they stick pretty much close to the blueprint, right? So you won't say, hey, hang on, that's not in the blueprint, that's not fair, right? So they've done a good job on that. The other thing also, if you look at the blueprint kind of go through, in a compressed manner, the life cycle of a VMware designer, right? So you started with the requirements, etc., with Alistair covered, right? And then you go through the logical design, you know, and then the physical design, and then of course you do a network design, storage design, and security design, and a VM design, your cluster design. So they went through it, right? So it's all fair and square. And I would also say that you don't get a lot of, hey, that is a DCA kind of question, you know, and then I thought this is design, this is not admin. So that's what I felt, and hopefully that gives everybody a peace of mind, and then hence you can focus on preparing for the test as opposed to worrying. Okay, that's all I got to say. Any questions on it?
One thing I wanted to say was I got some feedback from some other people who have taken the beta, and one of the feedback items that I liked was a comment that there seemed to be less trap questions, less questions where the obvious answer that you got from reading the question in a very superficial way was the wrong answer. So one of the feedbacks I got was that improved the exam, that it didn't lead you to sort of wrong points along the way. So the other feedback was that it is still very much the same style and format that we saw in the DCD4, which is why last week I was talking about the Visio-like diagramming tool. That's still in the exam, and I think it's still valid to go and look at the DCD4 environment guide or environment demo that John Hall recorded a year or so ago. So that you'll find on the vmware.com/certification. If you go into the VCAP5 DCD page, there's a link to the environment demo. That still holds true as being a good impression of the environment that you're going to get from what we've heard.
Yeah, and the tool has improved actually compared to the DCD4 beta. I found it very stable, and however, there's not the experience of another colleague of mine. And I found the same experience that I couldn't come back. I couldn't go back to a question. The back button didn't work for me, but it worked for him, right?
Right.
And of course, the other thing is I didn't have...
Yeah, I've talked to two people who said they've been able to go back, but when they went back to the diagrams were blank, leading you to the fear that going back to the diagram questions had actually wiped the answer you'd previously given. One question from the floor. Karthik, welcome back again. Nice to see you with us again. It's always good to see people who come back for repeat sessions. I've got a question saying, basically you're saying don't get too deep into the new things, and that fundamentally design hasn't changed, so it's not really about new features of vSphere so much as I think that the blueprint tells us there's a bit of a different emphasis on the process of design, but it's not really about specific features so much.
On the other hand, what I'm going to say is you do need to know the features very well. They're not going to testing you on a corner case, particular go deep on particular feature, right? And this is my general impression. Now, folks, having said that, in a sense, I'm saying all these things. I don't want to give the impression that the exam is easy. I'm just coming from an angle that I think you can pass. Whether you can get 450 or 490, that's another matter. You know what I mean? Because 300 is a passing mark, right?
Yeah, so 400 for me is having studied too much and having not spent enough time with my family. Yeah, so it is still that good, nice advanced exam. It's still a valuable certification to have because it is an advanced exam. But like the V4 one, it will be significantly harder if you haven't previously done a reasonable amount of vSphere design.
Yeah, the question I would also have improved. In the past, you could kind of guess, that the answers, just by looking at the answer A, B, C, D, you know the A, B, and wrong, for example. I think that's a bit difficult nowadays. You got to look at the questions. Okay, can I go to the security?
Let's go on.
Is there any other questions?
Not at the moment.
Okay. Now, so I have 3 files actually, and number one is some guides, some technical information on security, designing security that I thought is relevant for you guys. I know that everybody on the line are pretty much PCP. You are all hands-on. Some of you actually, it's your day job, as a VMware admin in a large environment, right? So, but I just put it there together. It is by a guy called Rob Randall, a guy that I respect. So he's one of the global SE in the security team, right? So I've just basically stole some of his deck, right? And took the part that things are kind of relevant from security design point of view. And I'm also mindful not to put VMware marketing slide deck inside there. So that's one deck. The other deck is, Alexa, are you able to show the other deck?
I can open the other deck.
Yeah,
Bear with me. Well, there we go. Cloud architecture. And I'll just change what I'm sharing. No, cloud architecture is now shit. try and convince.
So I can control your machine, right?
I don't think you can control.
Okay, never mind. Then can you go to slide 2 quickly? Oops.
In this one, in the architecture?
Yeah.
Or you want to go back to the security?
No, go to the architecture.
Yep.
Thank you.
So.
Okay, essentially this thing, right? This thing is a pretty long deck. Unlike the other one, which is like a short 15 deck, this thing, the 15 slides, this is like more than 100 slides, right? So this thing is basically I put together with, I guess, a lot of learning from customers and partners, right? So I put together what I call a sample. So if you were to, you do as part of your day job, you do a lot of design, right? So in a sense, for some customers who are not so familiar, so they will ask me, you know, can you give a sample design? So this is how this slide came about. Essentially, I put together some sample design, right? And of course, I tried to list my thought process. Is it okay you go to slide 2?
Heading on. And incidentally, Saurabh, another of our frequent guests, was asking for exactly this kind of material, so really cool that you already had planned to give him exactly what he wanted.
Yeah. So you notice that I say there the purpose is not to be presented, it's meant to be read because there's a lot of very small fonts, right? So this is essentially the whole, well, I try to make it the complete life cycle of a design, right? You're given an environment, and I give 3 examples. I think like a 50 VM and then 500 VM and 5,000 VM environment. What would the design look like, right? Now, is it okay you go to slide 3? Right. Okay. So essentially, you notice here that I go through the thought process, right? Basically, there's an introduction, then there is a data center design. You know, how many sensor, how many virtual data center, how many clusters, right? And then I go into the server design itself, the ESX design, right? Are you going for 2 times 10 GE? Are you going for SCOE? Are you going for 10 NIC? Or are you going for 8 NIC, right? And are you going for a local SSD, that kind of thing. And then I go to a network design, storage design, and security and compliance design, then the VM, etc. So you see, pretty much, it's kind of like complementing the design workshops. In the design workshop, which I recommend, because it's kind of closely, I mean, I recommend that for 2 reasons. Number one, you get to meet your peers in the class, right? People who are doing the same kind of thing like you do, right? But number 2, for the purpose of VCAP, that is a very good material, the design workshop, right? And Alistair teaches the thing anyway, so he can tell you better about it.
I think I've already told every time I get a chance, I've said how good the design workshops are for this, and it was a design workshop that I met Ewan on, and we had a fabulous time with 20-odd students. I've got a question come up about how we can get this particular file. When we post up this gets announced up on Professional VM, or at least when the recording gets processed, there'll be links in there, and I will include the link to the VMware Community's website where Ewan has very generously posted this up for anybody who's interested in it. So it will absolutely go up. And our friend in, dang, I've forgotten the country, in Eastern Europe has already found the document online as well. Let me actually, I will put it out into a chat to all of, a question to all if I can.
Yeah, and apparently, I guess the document has been up on the internet for a long time. So if you just Google vSphere design best practice, that apparently came out as number 1 or number 2 in the list. And it's not meant to be design best practice. I'm just an SE here in Singapore. I'm not an expert. And I would say just it's a collection of thoughts, right, on what you do on the design. And the other thing also in the deck, you will find that it is in PowerPoint format. It's not in PDF format when you download that, because there are sticker notes, right? And hopefully that is useful for you. Now, Alastair, can you go to the security section? Let me tell you exactly what slide number. Maybe faster if I scroll on my side here.
It will be, but as I rock through, I think people are getting a flavour of just how much material that you've put into this, and that's one of the things I always see in Ewan's slides, is there is a huge amount of material in all the slide decks he puts together. So if you're on a slower connection, you're probably not seeing every slide, but there's 106 slides in this deck.
Yeah. So apparently slide 81 is where the security starts.
That looks like it.
Yeah. Can you just go to the next slide? Okay. So again, what I did here is nothing but just summarizing pretty much things that you already know as a physical designer. When it comes to security, what are the things you can play? What are the things that you must decide? Right now, you know that you know there is always a VM. The whole purpose of running a physical is because you're going to run VM, right? So VM is an area that you need to secure, right? Or at least you need to think in terms of security. Then, of course, underneath the VM, there are three things. There is the servers, which is ESXi in version 5 now, and then there is storage and there is network, right? And okay, well, I think one of the things, now that you know it is version 5, there is no more ESX, so you don't have to, in a sense, be worried that they're going to asking you on service consoles, right? So they're quite fair, right? So, of course, the server, storage, network. And, of course, then the other part itself is the management part, is the feed center, is the VMA, etc., that we also need to secure. So this, to me, represents the 5 areas that you need to consider in terms of security design. And again, the design workshop kind of covered it in more detail. They went through the point one by one, basically, right? So let's go and take a look at it in the VM itself, right? And of course, we know the guest OS, you need to secure that, right? We need to know, for example, in terms of design, and if you got somebody who is a VM admin, the same person is the MSAD admin, that guy gets pretty much too powerful, right? And I know there's a large enterprise here in Singapore that is exactly what they do. So and of course we know there have been cases on the internet, where basically the guy wiped out things because he's got access to both and he was fired, right? Now the other thing is VMDK. VMDK itself is a file. It can be copied, and somebody can, the VM admin can certainly copy that in a browser data store, right-click, or not right-click, click on it and then click download to his laptop, and then he can mount it, right? And as you know, today we don't have a mechanism to encrypt the VMDK, at least not from VMware. The other thing from a design point of view is because we are running a shared environment, so a VM runs on the same ESX with many other VMs, and a VM shares the network fish switch, and a VM shares the data stores, right? So how do you prevent if that VM gets compromised, and how do you prevent when somebody suddenly decided to run an IO meter and issue lots of IOPS, right? Or issue lots of network packets, right? And we know from a CPU and from a RAM point of view, he's probably being capped at the configured RAM. If it's only been given 2 CPU, that's all he can do. He will max up the 2 CPU, but there's not much else he can do beyond that 2 CPU, right? And on the memory, of course, he can do lots of writing, and that will make the ESX busy writing the pages. And of course, as part of security and compliance, you get to review the law, right? Now, I'm going on to the servers. Now, in ESX, okay. Now, remember that I know that when you do a VMware design, right, when you do a physical design, there are other things that are kind of beyond VMware, right? So you can be assured, I would say, that the exam is pretty fair. It's not going to ask you things that are beyond the VMware context, in a sense, right? Now, if you look at what is in the VMware context, though, there are certain things that are unique in the VMware world, right? Lockdown mode. You don't find lockdown mode in ARX or in the physical world. So that falls straight into the responsibility of a VMware designer, right? So you can expect that kind of thing, and of course that kind of thing is in the blueprint. It is also in the design workshop, right? So in general, things that are specific to VMware, you need to know that, right? And so you need to know, and there is a good article by my colleague Michael Webster, is a VCDX in New Zealand. right? And he owns the blog Long White Cloud. And I think, Alistair, you know him, right?
Oh yeah, good friend of mine.
Yeah. So he did cover lockdown mode in greater depth. So you need to know that, right? And same thing in firewall, right? And so basically in ESXi now there is a firewall, right? So you need to know that. And what are some of the design considerations in firewall? And yeah, and then of course as a mechanism for us to log on remotely, you know basically the DCUI, right? The DCUI in version 5 now you can log on remotely and bring up the DCUI. You just type after your SSH to your ESXi, and then you just type DCUI, press enter, and then that yellow and black screen will come up, right? So then move on to the storage, right? And I can only think of, please feel free to interrupt also Alistair, and if I miss something, right? Because apologies, it's been a busy week, so I'm just, I didn't get a chance to look at the design workshop and then try to put things, the complete list inside here. So on the storage part, I only put 2 things. So naturally, from VMware point of view, as a designer, you've got to be clear. Okay, when do you do the LAN masking? You know, and if you've got, for example, 25 ESX in 3 clusters, how do you do the LAN masking? And basically the thought process behind it. And same thing with the zoning, right? And zoning, it is not a unique concept in VMware, but it is something that we also need to do. It applies to us, right? Especially when you are using fiber channel, right? And I think in the design workshop, correct me if I'm wrong here, Lester, we talk about a single initiator and single target as a best practice.
Absolutely,
right?
is
So
definitely documented best practice.
It is, right?
Oh yeah, single initiator, single target. That's one zone.
Right, right. So now in the ESX also on the storage, iSCSI, there is a chat protocol, right? You know that. So you got to know what is that chat protocol, understand when you use it, what is the drawback, for example, right? So these are the security design things that we do. Moving on to network. Now, so if you look at, if you are being the person who have to come up with a task, and you are being basically guided by the principle, it's got to be fair and square, right? So, but you want it to be an advanced test, right? So you got to be testing on the various advanced features of VMware, right? Of the product. So, like for example, you know that in the network side there are the normal switch and there is a distributed switch, right? And you get to know in the distributed switch, for example, what are some of the limitations or some of the operational concern, right? Availability concern when you run everything in as a distributed switch, right? Because there is a reliance on vCenter. And again, Duncan Epping, another great colleague in VMware, and Michael Webster recently, I think in the past 2 weeks, there have been discussions about the distributed switch, especially when there is a failure, right? So as a designer, you need to know that, right? And of course, the distributed switch bring up features such as the VPLAN. This is unique. So and then there are also other things, right? And such as NetFlow that allows you to monitor. So you got to know as in the world of network, in the world of network and in the world of vSphere, what are the things you can play and what are the things you must decide. And once you have in a mental picture of these are the things that you need to look after, and these are the things that you can play, you pretty much can feel confident about tackling the security part of the DCD exam, right? And of course, the third point, right? C-shield, right? You know that we talk about not having an air gap, a manual air gap, right? And which are common. So because the task here is about you as the VMware designers, right? And in reality, you may maintain an air gap because of whatever consideration in the customer side. And again, I think the test tries to be fair and square, the test isn't imposing that you got to do things the VMware way. I think it's quite practical, and that's what I like about a test. It's quite practical. It's quite fair and square, right? So, and it goes back again to the requirement part of customers. I think Alistair covered that very well in the first sessions of the professional brown bag, right? And speaking of that, the testing is on the whatever that comes in that basically in vSphere, right? So, like for example, if Visual Edge is not, I don't recall that Visual Edge is part of vSphere, so you don't expect it's going to be inside, right? Again, they're quite fair on that. But Visual Zone is bundled though, so you can be expected in a sense that there might be questions on Visual Zones, right? Because that's within the scope, right? Okay, and then the management part. Now, the roles, how you secure vCenter, the permission in that, so we got to know that, right? And the separation of duty between the storage guy and the network guy, the VM owner, the VMware admin, so you need to know that. You need to have a mental picture of what are the various roles in vCenter, what they can do, what are the various permissions that you can set. So you need to know that. And the next few slides, maybe Alistair, you can go to the next slide.
Before we head on, we have one question out in the chat about NFS storage not mentioned. Now, it wasn't on the slide, but it is absolutely in scope for design and for looking at security considerations. The other thing I wanted to call out on the IP storage in general was, of course, we do have a best practice about a physical isolation between any of your IP storage networks. And we do talk about a best practice of dedicating physical network adapters for either type.
Yeah, sorry about that.
Yeah.
And yes. So
we've also got a question just come in on the chat about features for a virtual machine to prevent a denial of service attack.
Yeah. Okay. So in a sense, when you put a virtual machine in a shared environment, so as a designer, you also need to think, what if that VM get compromised, right? A single VM get compromised, and you are running a farm of 1,000 VMs, and what can you do? What can you do? I have a real case actually. There is a banking customers that they're running on 4.0, unfortunately, and this is not a deliberate attack, but it just happens that the VM is very, very I/O intensive. And you notice in 4.0, there is no way you can control that. If you look at the VM property, you right-click a VM, edit settings, right, and then you bring up the VM property, and I think under the tab resources, you see the CPU resource and the memory resource where you can set the share, reservation, limit. Then there is another one called disk. And when you click on the disk, right, you can see the virtual disk, let's say disk 1, disk 2, that kind of thing. And for each of the disks, you can actually set the share. Now in 4.0, there was no third column called limit in IOPS. Now that came out, I believe, in 4.1 or in 5.0, right? So that is a mechanism. So in the case of this bank, because they're running 4.0, well, they actually have to move it to another ESX somewhere else, right? And the application team actually doesn't mind being slowed down because they couldn't control it, right? Now, in 5.0, you can turn on storage I/O control. Or you can, if you don't want to turn on the storage I/O control for the entire data store, just for that VM alone, you can control the IOPS. You can actually put a hard limit on the IOPS that the VM could generate on that disk, on a per disk basis. So that will prevent, in a sense, a storm or denial of, since we talk about security today, a denial of service, right? And that handles the disk part. On the network part, it's the same thing, right? The network I/O control will come in because if you're having 2 times 10 GE switch, network switch, and that's being shared by everybody, and unless you put a cap, a VM could, correct me if I'm wrong here, Alistair, a VM could basically jam up the NIC.
Absolutely. There's lots of ways we can saturate 10 gig NICs, and a busy VM is one.
Yeah, and then on the memory and on the CPU, The CPU is quite safe because if you give the VM to his CPU, if he maxes out at 100%, and he's going to just be stay at 2 CPU. If your ES has 12 cores, 2 times 6, the other 10 is pretty much safe, right? And he can do, by generating lots of I/O, definitely the way the scheduler works. So ESX hypervisor will probably use another core to do the I/O on behalf of the VMs, right? But that's probably just another core. You can't, a VM with 2 CPU, I don't think you can jam up 12 CPU in an ESX. And that is my understanding of how the scheduler works. Anyway, if it's wrong, please let me know. And then on the memory part, the VM could be just keep on writing to the memory, just write 0. And of course, then the hypervisor will oblige, right? And he's going to have to write 0, right? But again, if the VM is given 4 gig of RAM and your ESX has 96 gig, I think pretty much, it can't go beyond an extra gig or 2 beyond that, what is allocated. So that's my understanding. Does that answer the question?
I think we've covered the what I call the 4 food groups and how you could how we'll reduce the risk of any of those being exhausted for denial of service. I think that's pretty cool.
Okay. Next, on the next slide. Last slide.
So we're on the folder slide.
Oh, hang on. I'm sorry. Yeah, well, I think fine. We can do this one. This is something that's quite interesting. All right, because I don't see it used much by customers. The favorite part of my job is just go to a customer and say, let's just log on to vCenter and let me give you my 2 cents from VMware point of view, right? And folder can be used for security. I was doing a testing with a customer. So basically, I create a folder, and in that folders, I put all the local data stores, right? Because typically, we don't really want to manage the local data stores, right? And then we're using the vCenter operations to connect to vCenter. And by specifying the permission on the folder to have no access for the user of vCenter operation, so vCenter operation does not see the local data stores at all, which helps them in capacity management because they don't want to include local data stores in capacity management, right? I also tried, right? So I gave a user no access to that folder that contains all the local data stores. So when I go to any of the ESX, I click on it, and it brings up, the admin client show up all the tabs, and I go to the configuration tab, and I go to the storage tab, and you know that it will list all the data stores, and the local data store is not visible. So that's pretty cool. I didn't know that. So that is a security mechanism. So once it is given no access, that user cannot see it. Right? And so that is on the folder part. So Lester, could you come back one slide back? Yeah, this one, good. This is something that I'm still trying to fully understand. When you provision the VM, you go through a wizard, and in that wizard, you got to choose a data store. And so, if you are saying that you're going to do a separation of duty between the storage team and the VMware team, and the storage team is the one that decides which data store a VM leaves, I don't think that's going to work because that wizard of VM provisioning requires access to the data store. So my point here is as a designer, we want to have a separation of duty, and we want to give responsibility to people. We want to give authority to people with the responsibility and the expertise. We want to match that, right? If storage should be owned by the storage team, if virtual storage should be owned by a storage team, then at which point you draw the line, and that line is also affected by the privilege in vCenter. So you got to test it.
Iwan, one of the places that I talk about this one is where you've got things like, you've got maybe some tier 3 storage that you might allow the software developers IT support organization, they may be allowed to create virtual machines on tier 3 storage, but only your core server virtualization team are allowed to create virtual machines on your tier 1 and tier 2 storage. Or in networking, right. The developers may be allowed to connect virtual machines to the network that connects to the development environment and is isolated. But again, only the core IT server infrastructure guys are allowed to connect VMs to the network that is production. And even more secured would be a DMZ port group where there may only be 3 people in the entire organization who are permitted to attach a VM to that port group.
Right.
The other fun thing that's up in here is the idea about the VMware admin is not equal to the Active Directory admin. And remember that the vCenter server, when it's installed, devolves administrator rights to the entire infrastructure to the local administrators group on vCenter server, which is usually contains domain admins. That one's an interesting discussion.
That is still the case in version 5.
Absolutely, and well, somebody's got to be given rights, and that group has the highest rights on the machine we're installing vCenter to.
Correct. So this kind of thing, as a vSphere designers, so this falls right under the responsibility, right? So this kind of thing is a fair and square questions, right? Okay. Now, Alastair, could you show the third file, the Word document? So what Alastair is doing that, I recommend that you go through, I know it's kind of painful, but you go through the manuals. The manual in version 5 is better than the manual in version 4. I remember in version 4 there are quite a number of duplications. Right? Now, I've gone through it pretty much 3 times by now. It's very boring though. So basically what I do, I went through the manuals, basically line by line. Right? So if you take a look at this, that's pretty much the manual. And if you can go to the security part, I think there is like a table of contents on the left. Yes, that part, right? So essentially here, the headings there is pretty much the manual's heading. And what I do is basically as I read the manuals, I would try to digest it, and I would mark questions that I don't understand. It's like a study notes for myself, right? And I also find things that I don't understand, and I find things that I don't think is right. For example, right? As a vSphere designer, you have to decide: are you going to basically reduce the privilege of the ESXi root to a point that it is useless and create another one, or not? Or are you going to leave root as it is? Right? And now you can't delete it though. I think things will break. Although I don't know exactly what things will break, but you can't delete it. And the other thing what you can do also, if there are things that are either not clear or you think is wrong in the manual, you can always send a feedback. I think it's called docfeedback@vmware.com. And I did that. And within VMware internally, when you send an email to that address, a service request will automatically be created. Naturally, it's a low priority service request because we're not talking about production systems here. It's a manual, right? And somebody will be assigned, and eventually the technical writer himself or herself will contact you, right? So from my experience, they did get back, right? And so that is helpful. The other one that I find useful also, and this is a tip from one of the VMware trainer, in fact, right? Daniel was telling me, instead of doing a copy paste like what I did here, you can just open the manual in PDF, and then you can just use the PDF notes or comment features, right? And I did that also and I've been studying. I started doing that also because I found that it complements things pretty well. I use the Microsoft Word when I need to type things longer, when I need to, let's say, copy paste certain things. Can we scroll down here, Alastair? I want to show you a couple of things. More, please. There should be a picture. Maybe I'll let me scroll on my part here. There should be the DCUI screen. There should be a DCUI screen somewhere along the line. Let me just check on my part here.
Still looking. And again, lots and lots of material here.
Yeah, because they're basically from the manual, right? So I tried to copy paste. I tried to highlight things, and this is my own note. This is the one. This is the one. Go down. I was playing with the lockdown mode, right? So from a vSphere designer's point of view, like we need to know, right? When we make changes in ESXi host, it doesn't get replicated to vCenter. So what I did here, I was playing. I turn on lockdown mode at the ESXi level instead of from vCenter level. And when I did that, I couldn't enable it at vCenter or vice versa, right? So this is another thing that we need to know, right? Hang on, Alistair, just a moment. I wonder which part of the screen you are. Okay, can you scroll further, just like 1 or 2 screens down only?
Is the lockdown mode?
There you go, lockdown mode, right? So if you notice lockdown mode, well, lockdown mode is covered pretty well in the design workshop. It is also covered pretty well in the manual, right? Because it is something that is unique in ESXi, and of course we are very concerned about the hypervisor access here, right? So it is a major thing in the vSphere design, right? And what I want to share here, if you can just scroll one more screen down, right? So this is showing that you can even disable that. So I disabled the DCUI. So you could, even though someone is in front of the console, he couldn't access the DCUI because I want to disable it. And that's what you got, right? When you disable the DCUI services, because it's just a services. So in this
we
case,
usually refer to this as total lockdown mode, and of course the fun is when you break the service, the VM kernel management networking on your ESX server. Yeah.
So in a sense, things such as you have to know, right, the difference between the total lockdown mode and the normal lockdown mode, because again that falls, squarely under the responsibility of a VMware designer. So we are left with about 10 minutes. Maybe can we just do the Q&A discussion?
Yeah, we've currently got no open questions in the question field, but please have at it, everybody who's got questions left for Iwan in our 10 minutes or so remaining. So Sunil's asking, just to clarify on that lockdown mode, about where when you've switched it on using the DCUI, did you say that you couldn't switch it off through vCenter?
So I turned it on at ESXi, and I couldn't turn it off from vCenter. It doesn't propagate.
So did the vCenter server not yet see that lockdown mode had been enabled?
No, it couldn't disable it.
Right. It could definitely tell that it was locked down, but not.
Correct. But yeah. It couldn't. So there's something wrong. Basically, it couldn't access because it's locked, right? But it couldn't enable it.
Yeah, and I'd agree. Ravi's saying that seems like a bug. So we probably go on, post that one up as a bug and make yourself very popular.
Because I think we know, right? Things we do in ESX does not update vCenter.
Yeah. And the other thing about vCenter is when it does get updated, there can be a long latency between the two. That if vCenter is showing you the contents of its database, and it can be much out of date with the real world that you've done directly.
Yeah, and of course that that kind of thing goes into another part of the design, right? When you're designing for a robo environment, remote office, branch office, how would you do that? You got to know. Right, the difference between putting the vCenter locally and putting the vCenter at the headquarters, what are the pros and cons from a design point of view? But that's a separate topic. That's not a security topic.
I've got a question about total lockdown mode if you forget the root password. Yeah, if you haven't properly secured your root password on your ESXi servers, then pain follows. But with total lockdown mode, you can still manage through vCenter, so none of the lockdown modes stop you from managing the ESX server through vCenter. It's just when you come to do something like recovering it. The purpose of the DCUI is to allow you to get to the point where the ESX server can be remotely managed. And so what total lockdown mode, one of the consequences of total lockdown mode is if you can't remotely manage the ESXi server, you can't manage it at all, which is the risk.
Yeah, and yeah, like I say, you can still enable it from the vCenter because CPX users still have access to it, right? And
you can turn off lockdown mode. Yeah, the specific question was about losing the root password, and I don't believe you can recover the root password through vCenter or reset the root password because you've never been able to manage local users on an ESX or ESXi server unless you'd authenticated directly to that ESXi server, so not through vCenter. I've got a question about these study notes. Iwan, are you happy for these study notes to be posted along with the recording of this session?
Fine. Yeah, it's fine.
So they will go up. I will put them up, and they will get published up sometime following the conclusion of the session.
Yeah, you notice that basically I only did like 2 or 3 manuals because I switched to the PDF way of doing things.
And the annotated PDF, yeah, makes turn up. Nick's got a question about recommendations for using SSL encryption. Now my recollection was pretty much all of the communication between ESX and vCenter was SSL encrypted, but that's a vague recollection.
Yeah, I think that's encrypted, and so is from the admin client to vCenter.
Yeah, so my recollection was there was no way to turn off that encryption. It always was SSL encrypted.
Oh, I'm not sure whether you can turn it off.
SSL certs. Okay, so we're moving. His point was moving away from the self-signed certificates. For those who are following blogs, this is another thing to look at longwhiteclouds.com, where Michael Webster's been spending quite a bit of time working with properly PKI'd certificates for servers. What do you feel, Iwan? Where do you go with ditching the self-signed certificates? What makes you go out and work with properly trusted certificates?
Yeah, I think in the design workshop, I don't want to say it in like promoting the design workshop here.
I'm happy for you to promote them.
Here, because the topic here is a VCAP, right? And so we're discussing here within the context of how to get we work study together to pass the VCAP, right? And so I keep referring to the design workshop because that's to me, it is very close to the actual VCAP blueprint and the exam, right? I think if I recall correctly, in the design workshop, we recommend that you change the self-sign with something that is a third party, but you don't use the default certificate. Right, because if you use a default certificate, there is a risk you can have a man-in-the-middle attack.
Yeah, definitely the recommendation is to deploy a trusted certificate and to educate your users that if they ever get the pop-up that the certificate is not trusted, that the correct answer is not to accept the certificate. But there's a heap of other things. I mean, one of the other recommendations, and it was on the DCUI screen that I had highlighted up earlier on in error, was things like the SHA-1 thumbprints, that when we add an ESX server to vCenter, we're shown the SHA-1 thumbprint and we're asked to verify this is correct. How many customers actually go and check it? Because they should.
I check it for every single year, right?
Every single time you walk into the data center, open up the console of that ESXi server. Got another question from I'm loving seeing familiar names. So Dara, we really have to talk and have a remote beer. Dara was addressing the question about losing the password for the root user ID on your ESXi server, and of course he brings up that we can now use the likewise component and we can make our ESXi server a member of AD. If we've done that, then any user in the AD who's been devolved rights on the ESXi server could be used to reset the root password, or should be able to be used to reset the root password. Certainly you could log in through the vSphere client directly onto the ESX server where you'd lost the root password and reset it.
Good point. Who's that? Is that Darren?
No, Dara. He's joining us from, hopefully he's at home in Roscommon in Ireland, starting his working day.
Yeah. So going back to that, the default certificate and the man in the middle attack, right? And so that is covered in the design workshop. Now, I would say in the exam, you were not expected to troubleshoot, a certificate problem, right? That's because that is part of a DCA already. But you need to understand from a design point of view, what are the limitations?
Well, that's the fundamental thing about the design exam. The outputs of the design are pieces of paper telling what to do. You have to know how to produce those pieces of paper and make the decisions around them. You don't have to go out and fix stuff when it's broken, but you need to make sure that you design so that it can be fixed when it's broken.
Yeah.
One of the other questions that's come up in the chat, and the questions returning one is something that I noticed when I sat the exam, was that the blueprint, certainly the V4 blueprint, was full of links on best practices for virtualizing applications. And whilst they're a fabulous read for the moment when you need to virtualize that application, I wasn't convinced that I saw questions related to specific applications in the exam. Do you have the feeling that you were asked specific questions? We can't comment on the actual questions that were asked. It's a really difficult point. But my recollection was that I didn't feel that if I'd done plenty of design work previously, that reading those documents in great detail was the most valuable use of my study time. I figure if you've not done design work in the past, then those best practices are good ways of understanding the compromises. But I didn't feel that, from my background of previously doing quite a bit of design work, that they were a good use of my time.
So in a sense, again, about application here, you talk about, let's say, the Oracle or
SQL Exchange.
Right. So you shouldn't really expect that you are tested on certain very, very specific Exchange-only kind of questions. But how Exchange relates to the design of Exchange in vSphere, I know how does DAG work with HA, that kind of thing. So you need to know that, because that is within the territory between VMware and Exchange, but not the Exchange itself. Yeah,
I feel that they're really good for informing you about how to make design decisions, what things drive design decisions. But as you say, the actual detail of how to make Exchange highly available on vSphere is not necessarily a direct question. I've got a question again. Now that we've got lots of questions coming out of the floor, what I think we might start doing is running some sessions that are straight Q&A, and we might try and get a panel of all of the people who have presented sessions to come in and do some straight up Q&A discussion ones, because often the most valuable stuff comes in these questions. And the question was whether we're going to continue this one. Clearly, we didn't finish networking. And I'm not sure how you're feeling, Yuan, whether you felt there was more material. If we had another hour to play with, whether you'd want to do some more material on this. My other thought on it is, of course, part of the reason for this is to encourage you guys to do your own study. It's not a substitute for your own study in your own time as well.
Yeah, we can have, I think once we publish the materials, right, and that will be enough, hopefully, materials for people to form a discussion, right? And then we can discuss around that.
Yeah, that sounds like a good plan. So we'll keep hitting up the sessions that are aimed at areas of the blueprint, and then maybe do one or two sessions that are shorter amounts of content, maybe bite off smaller pieces of the blueprint and leave more space for just general discussion. Because I know really useful to have you on, Ewan. Always good to talk with you, and the rest of your team as well. I'm sure there's more than two others who are useful. We got a couple of returns on total lockdown mode, and total lockdown mode always fills me with a slight dread when people talk about implementing it, which was that no DC UI to fix networking in your ESX server if you've broken it, and no management other than through vCenter. So definitely there is that risk around if you break networking to your ESXi, then you've got no manageability. Your only option on that ESXi server is to rebuild it. One of the comments in a question was about HA suddenly not working well. HA operates, and particularly on vSphere-5, HA operates extremely reliably, irrespective of the presence or absence of vCenter. It happens peer-to-peer amongst the ESX servers, so it's more robust and reliable than it's ever been before. I wouldn't consider total lockdown mode to compromise that. How do you feel about that one, Ewan?
Lockdown mode.
And specifically total lockdown mode, where not only can you not manage directly, but you can't go in with the DCUI and fix networking. I don't think that has a direct impact on HA, but maybe you've seen something different.
No, well, not directly. Not directly. I'm just thinking because a lot of things can go wrong in HA, right? And when things go wrong, and you try to especially when the vCenter is down. See, the total lockdown mode becomes a problem, right? If basically the vCenter is not available, because you basically cannot go into ESX directly. So, from a design point of view, the impact is you gotta pay attention more to the vCenter. The availability of vCenter becomes more important in the total lockdown mode. But by itself, I don't think. I mean, I can't think of a direct impact direct relationship between HA and total lockdown mode.
Yeah.
It's a good question, though.
It's one of those ones where when you get hurt by it, you'll probably get hurt very badly. But I don't see that there's a direct HA interaction. But if HA is unhappy, it certainly removes a lot of the troubleshooting options that you would otherwise have. Yeah,
I would suggest that the folks check out that long white cloud blog by Michael Webster, and perhaps you can even ask him on that point, because he did quite a fair bit of tests on this total lockdown mode thing.
So that link to that blog post will be in the notes for this show as well when they go out. All right. Well, Ewan, I'm conscious that we've run through our time, and I'd rather keep the sessions nice and condensed rather than having them ramble on too long, particularly since I'm pretty sure we can convince you to come back and do some more discussions with us.
I'm happy to share my 2 cents.
Yeah. So thanks very much again for joining me, and